All right. Well, welcome to episode 2 of our little show. So I've been really looking forward to today's episode. Today's topic is a bit of a mouthful. So it's data with a side of story, how to win over business leaders without boring them. That topic sounds pretty dry, but our guest is anything but dry. Let's give a big welcome to Tom Mackintosh, affectionately known as Tosh. If you don't know Tosh, you should connect with him on LinkedIn. He's a pretty friendly guy. If you see him out at a party, which he frequents quite a lot, go up and introduce yourself.
Speak for yourself, Dave.
yeah, guilty. Tom's a pretty interesting cat. So, like most of us, recruitment wasn't his first job. And in fact, following his BA in film studies, which I think we spoke about last time we had a beer, Tosh started selling snowboards in the mountains of France and England before trying his hand at teaching English in Korea to Koreans. Pretty cool. He then landed his first recruitment role with Command Recruitment in Sydney. A year later, found himself in-house and the head of TA for Yahoo. And more recent roles include General Manager Expand. And now we find him with 2 roles because he just can't get enough on his plate. So he's the Director of Business Applications and Talent at Talent, and he's the Managing Director at Solve. So Tosh, welcome to the show, mate.
Thanks, Dave. That is quite the bio.
It is.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's lots of interesting stories in the middle there, but
some of the best shared over a beer, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So, hey, mate, thanks for coming to join us today. I guess let's start with a little bit of context. Where do you sit in your business? I know you have 2 roles. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about those. And what kind of influence do you feel you've been able to have or build from there?
Sure. So, yeah, as you say, 2 roles. So, firstly, as the Managing Director of Solve, which is our RPO and outsourced services business. So, responsibility for the P&L. And in some ways, when I looked at the title of your session today, I thought to myself, well, often in this role, I'm the business leader that needs the data to be convinced by the data that's brought to me. So, it's a different role in that perspective. But by the same token, we, are going out and trying to convince our customers of the positive impact that we can make, and often therefore using our data and influence with them. So it's a role sort of twofold in terms of influence. As the Director of Business Applications across the business, I report up to the executive team of Talent International, and therefore, again, I'll need to have a very broad swathe of stakeholders across sales leaders in each region, and convince them that any kind of level of innovation that I want to roll out is in the best interest of them. So, there's quite a few different stakeholders that come out of that, and different positions that I take each time on how to use data and so on.
And do you find that that those sort of let's think external for a moment when you were talking to? So I'm going to make an assumption here, probably a bad one. You're talking to HRDs, or are you talking more sort of C-suite, CEO, COO? Where do you sort of pitch to when you?
Yeah, so because we're selling, the sale of an RPO or an MSP is usually a long-term agreement and a fairly high cost investment for a business. There's quite a broad buyers group usually. So, yes, the chief people officer or HRD may be the key point of contact, but there's also always the economic buyer and the CFO. There's often, certainly with large organizations, that's going to go through. Business leaders are going to have a say with their preferred method of going to market to hire people. There's any number. So, we've got to work across quite a broad swathe of people with very different profiles and interact with them differently.
And when you're initially sort of scoping out a new project, like obviously you're not coming in and going, hey, here's the data. Are you sort of trying to find out what is, because I guess we're going to get to this when we talk about internal people trying to present data internally, but are you, as part of that scope, like, are you trying to find out what data is going to move them before you go and find the data?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the biggest question that we'll ask them is, well, hopefully they release a tender to us and gives us as much data as possible. But
Yep.
but a lot of the time, we've got a Q&A with them and try and understand what is actually the biggest problem they're trying to solve, and have you got some data to support that, which allows us to then kind of unpick that and build a solution for them.
And do they generally know what the biggest challenge they're trying to solve is?
The different stakeholders will have different views on that sometimes. Yeah, that's interesting. So, the CPO may have a big problem around hiring, which they're trying to solve. But, the scale of that problem might not be considered quite so important to a different stakeholder, for example. So, it's variable across that buyers group for sure.
Yeah, okay. And you have to shift your sort of style depending on the stakeholder you're in front of at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the kind of data and the kind of information that really motivates the CPO might not be interesting to a CFO at all. They don't want to know the features of our service in any way. A lot of the time they want to understand bottom line, and they want it in their language, which means that we have to consider how we present those services quite differently to different stakeholders.
Yeah, okay. And I'm imagining that quite often all those stakeholders are in the same room though. So you're trying to present. Sometimes,
yeah. I mean, ideally you're able to get different sessions, but there's often the first presentation, you might have a whole load of them in the room at the same time.
Yeah. So, they're all looking for something else.
And trying to appeal to all of them at the same time can be quite challenging for sure.
Yeah. Okay. And, data, we talk about data, it's across LinkedIn. It's probably the second most thing after AI, right? Like it's just data. And not all data, I think, is great, but, just having it is not the answer. So given that it's everywhere and not all of it gets listened to because it is just everywhere, what's the difference between data that gets ignored and data that sparks action in your experience?
Well, I mean, I think, this is pretty commonplace, but firstly, the data that you present has to align with the audience. So know them, know the audience, know what motivates them, know what is driving them towards the company strategy. And that doesn't matter whether it's internal or external. That's absolutely crucial, because if the data that you're presenting is going to move their business unit forward or them forward, then they're more inclined to listen to it and to take action. But, that's kind of baseline for me. I think that what really gets interesting is when you're able to take, as you say, all of that data and start to overlay different parts of it to try and find some asymmetrical insights. So things that, a lot of the time we present data to business leaders, but intuitively they already know that stuff, right? You go and tell them things that are important to you or your business unit, like people data to a business leader. It took us this long to fill these roles. And they go, well, intuitively, I know that because I was the hiring leader. So, it's not really that important to them. So what's really important is where you can overlay different data from other business units. Find something, as I say, asymmetrical. So, something that is where they learn something about their own business unit that is unexpected and gives them an advantage as they rewrite their strategy moving forward. And that's where data really sparks action to me.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm just going back to the start of this conversation where quite often the point of entry or the main contact is the HRD. Are you finding that quite often you have to empower that person with data to have the conversation internally, or do you get brought in to present it?
Yeah, you absolutely do. So, often the CPO is not the economic buyer in that sense at all. So, there are those parts of our service, you have to empower them. You have to make it easy for them to have that conversation internally. Especially sometimes you don't get access to the economic buyer, which makes it even harder because you can't answer their questions and put it into the language that they want. So, finding the simplest way for them to present that to those individual stakeholders is key.
And be comfortable presenting, right? Sometimes it's not their strong suit either.
Absolutely, yeah. And so the ideal is really when the HRD or the CPO has already made that decision to go with an RPO, so they've already decided on that route, then you can then empower them to make sure that they're getting that decision over the line internally. I think also you can speak openly with them about what do they think that the defining data points that the CFO or the heads of procurement or the CEO even wants to hear. Because, we talk about data in so many different ways from a people perspective, cost per hire, for example, but cost per hire can be quite meaningless to a hiring manager because they say, I don't know what's a benchmark for that. They haven't got a clue.
Yeah.
So trying to pivot that into their language can often be more helpful. Like, okay, well, most hiring managers know what a percentage rate to use a recruitment agency is. So what would be the percentage higher when you use an internal team or a contractor or an RPO service?
Yeah.
And just changing the language there suddenly gives them context and they realize what value is all of a sudden.
Yeah, we obviously I'm in the sales team at Checkmate, and we talk about participating in your own rescue. So when our champion, let's say it's the CPO in this case, wants to take the project up to other stakeholders, we encourage them to go and find out what the data is that those stakeholders are going to be interested in or motivated by before we actually build it. So it's kind of like, hey, I want to go with an RPO. What do you need for us to approve this or to get this over the line? And it's, because often we don't have access to that economic buyer, but it is a project that we're working on with the HRD. They believe in it. They want to get it over the line. So they come back, participate in their own rescue kind of thing by going and finding out what we need, and then we build it together.
I like that language. That's great.
Yeah, it doesn't always work, but it's, it's part of the game, isn't it?
It's the same principle, though, isn't it? It's empowering. Yeah, I was at a really interesting conference yesterday, and there were some sales leaders on a panel talking about different approaches and how, there's so much data now that the sales processes have shifted. And especially in the market that we're in now, there's less confidence in individuals taking steps to invest themselves. And so figuring out how you need to bring multiple people into the decision and make all of them feel comfortable is really important. And so, finding those champions and empowering them internally is a great way.
And definitely sometimes, when I first started out, it was quite linear sales. You would talk to someone here and then as you go along, but now you've got to front load it. You've got to kind of bring in, if you've got a project you're thinking about, it's much easier if you bring in multiple stakeholders early. This is, I'm even talking about internally, like for us, not just selling something, right? It's like, get, Tom, Mary, and Bob across it so they can give you their, first thought on that project. And you're like, okay, I have to take those things into consideration and then go build some metrics around that.
Yeah, 100%. I think you said something really interesting there. I mean, I considered, when I moved into the group role, the Director of Business Applications, it was commented on a few times how I was able to rally people around initiatives that we were looking for. And it dawned on me that, operating internally, you still have to follow the same principles that you might do in sales, right?
Yeah.
And the reason some of those other leaders find it harder is because they've never worked in sales. It suddenly becomes quite apparent. And so those basic principles of bringing the stakeholders, getting them all on board, and then putting forward your premise and backing it up with data, that isn't something that they're familiar with. So I totally agree.
I think it's kind of, people think of that sales thing as a bad thing. And I had this conversation yesterday. If you're selling ice to Eskimos, then it is a bad thing, right? They need blankets and matches. But if you're selling them blankets and matches and things they can come back to, then there's value in that. I think even internally, we're all trying to influence an outcome of some sort, whether it's, the work I'm doing or, the next project, etc. So we're all selling in some regard. It's just kind of like, how do we refine that process? Can you just sort of coming back a little bit to our topic? Can you walk us through kind of a moment, maybe not naming names, but where you kind of use people metrics to shift a mindset or influence a business decision?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we're doing that quite a lot of the time.
Absolutely.
But yeah, to sort of try and pivot that back to maybe more internal, I think, there's often, let me think. So you think about, we looked at a situation where we're on site and we are the TA, talent acquisition function. And there's often a lot of pressure on us to continue to deliver. And, there's always a question of quality of hire. That's a key metric, right? So if people are leaving within the first 6 months or the first year and there's high turnover early in tenure, then a lot of fingers get pointed at talent acquisition. And, it's really important for that head of TA to be able to extract the right data and overlay it in order to reposition that. And so, the obvious thing for us in this situation where this was occurring was, our belief was that actually what was needed was leadership training. And, those conversations, it was in some agreement with the CPO that was probably true after looking at, the actual hiring data of where turnover was occurring. It was kind of isolated to one division, and then, overlaying the exit interview feedback on that and trying to get really granular as to what was happening. But the CPO made it quite clear that they didn't have the money for the investment, and so we need to get the CFO over the line. So again, you take all of that data we've already got and then add in some even further data, which is, well, let's look at the cost of rehire that this is impacting, or the loss of productivity, start to overlay those things and take that to the CFO. Suddenly the investment or the money was freed up a lot more easily, because they weren't concerned about, oh, I need to train managers. They're concerned with the bottom line. This is costing the business
100%. Yeah. It's funny because quite often we'll talk to people and they are focused on how long it takes to do a task, which we all are about our own tasks. But generally the senior leadership are kind of going, well, Tom, I'm already paying you X to do that. I don't care how long it takes, right? I've got other people, I need to buy a new tractor, or I need to, build a new mine, or whatever it is. But when we can correlate that, hey, this task wrapping up over, a year is meaning that we're losing a month of productivity in our mine, or we don't have nurses on shift when we need a headcount ratio and it's impacting our service delivery. That kind of, this data over here is impacting this data here. That's where you're kind of having an impact.
Yeah.
And I guess if we're thinking internal for a moment, and obviously, well, you saw how difficult it was for me to actually get this software working today. So I'm useless with technology. But if similarly, if you put a spreadsheet in front of me, I'd kind of glaze over and fall asleep. What tools or visuals or formats have you found that work really well when it's kind of bringing data to life or presenting it? How do you?
Yeah. That's a great question, and something we've worked through quite a lot with Solve actually for our customers in the last year, because we once we have a service up and running as an RPO, we work closely with senior leaders within HR who want to get granular. They want the detail of what's happening, and so we build out Power BI is a great tool for that. It's just simple visualizations, graphs, charts, different ways to absorb the data. But we use that to build interactive dashboards, which allows people to drill down in a really granular fashion. Though what we discovered quite quickly is, once you then put that in front of an enterprise CPO, there's just way too much data there, and they're like, just give me the story. What's the insight here? So rolling that up into different dashboards for different members of the C-suite is really key. That really should be done in tandem with speaking about what they want, right? So here's a dashboard that I could create for you. Here's 6 things that I think are important. What do you think? And they'll quickly unpick that and go, I don't care about that, but tell me why this is important or meaningful, and then you can adjust it and work with them.
I'm making an assumption, so I shouldn't do this, but when you're initially scoping out a project, and let's say that quality of hire is a key measurable. Are you trying to work out what the quality of hire is currently so that you can show improvement over time?
Over time, yeah.
Okay.
Usually, really important. Two things there is, with no context, the data is useless, right? You
Yeah.
go in and say, quality of hire is 75%.
Yeah.
I have no idea what that means.
Yeah. Is that up or
So,
down?
yeah. So you not only need to give it over a period of time and comparative, and that can show, initiatives that you're putting in place that are important, like, training up hiring managers on interview training or something like that.
Yeah.
But also, is there a benchmarking market? And that is often much, much harder for people teams to get that kind of data and analytics. But if you can benchmark it effectively, then, it becomes really powerful quite quickly, because then you've got context. And again, it's just about overlaying data, really.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And if I was someone sort of trying to use data more strategically, let's say I hadn't in the past, what's one mindset shift or habit that you would encourage your team in terms of turning information into influence?
I think the habit for me is making sure that you know it yourself,
Yeah, nice.
actually,
Yeah,
because I quite often see leaders who don't delve down into the granular details themselves, and therefore they can come unstuck quite quickly. And so, if you apply the same rigor to your own line of business as you might do to, you know, especially with people data, where you're talking about data across the whole business, you need to apply that to yourself first. And there was a phrase that came up. CPO used it recently, and it really caught my attention. But you need to be comfortable to kill your darlings, which sounds quite dark. But
yeah,
we all have passion projects that we really want to push, and often we'll skew data, or we'll find ways to present that. And this is really important. But you need to be comfortable to say, okay, actually, the data is showing me that this isn't a critical project, and I need to put that on the back burner. And if you can demonstrate to the business that you're willing to listen to the data to change your roadmap, then they're far more likely to trust you and to follow that path too.
yeah, absolutely. I can think of many times in my career that I have been in that conundrum. Awesome. All right, Tom, that's pretty good, man. I've got a couple of really key takeaways. I think, for me, I'll go backwards. So understanding the data and particularly how it applies to the various stakeholders seems pretty critical. Listening to that data, not trying to put your own kind of viewpoint over the top of it, but just kind of looking I'm going to add something there. And sometimes when I've done that, and it's clearly said my project isn't viable, isn't the right one, I've actually looked for other data sources to try and see if there's possibly a way. I can think of a number of times where, in fact, almost every time I've had to use data that's incomplete. So we don't
Yeah,
always know things and we're making assumptions. But in those cases, I've learned that we declare the assumption up front. Like,
yeah,
hey, this is what we think. This is the data, the best data we have. And right
yeah,
now, that's what it's telling us. It could change as we start reporting on this in a more accurate way. But today, it's telling us we have a problem and we
yeah.
need to address it. That's definitely something that in fact, every business I've been in, I think, has had to battle with that
Yeah.
incomplete data.
I think what's interesting for me there is, if you're trying to use the data of your team effectively, you really need the leadership team to already be data literate. And because if they're pushing back on your data, then you need to understand why that is. Is it that they're not being shown enough data themselves, or they're not making their own data driven decisions? So what I've found is useful is start where the data has to be accurate, which is finance, right?
For
Those
sure.
guys are already data literate, right?
Yeah.
So work with them and use that data to overlay what you have, first of all, because that's accurate and that's powerful, and
Yeah.
that you're going to have a champion supporting you with that. And that's really key stuff. And also, in a case of having kind of incomplete data or imperfect data, sometimes people get really hung up on like absolute precision and
Mm.
working towards 100% solution. Sometimes you can put a tool in place you can plug your different data sources in. It'll spit out some information, which will give you some good insight and get you 70% there quickly. Whereas trying to go and build the perfect outcome and the absolute precision can take you a long time, and you need a lot of resources to do that. Data scientist, data warehouse, you need to build a data.
And by the time you get there, things have changed, right? Like moving forward 100%. Is the key, I think.
That's right.
Yeah, 100%. And I think getting that, just having that benchmark that we talked about earlier, so kind of knowing what you're chasing for the various stakeholders, and then where we are today, what our future state would like to be, really, really key. A good way to end, mate. Hey, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. It's been cool. Yeah. Any last comments?
No, it's great to be on, mate. Good to chat. Looking forward to reflecting on this and telling some of those wilder stories at the pub next time I see you.
Which will be soon, hopefully.